of everything that's been going on over the last few weeks. This has been quite entertaining to look at, especially from a social media perspective of like what's going to happen now. But I will start off by saying that for those of us in the civic engagement space and those who want to use social media to make a difference, this doesn't change much for us. We continue to keep making a difference in our communities. So to get started, as was said in my introduction, my name is Evan Daniels. I am the content creation manager for an app startup called Wavely. Usually I do a really cool professional introduction that dives into all of my graphic design and all of those things. But I got started in social media around 7 or 8 years ago from a professional standpoint. I was working hard and managing social media accounts, and that helped me get through college. And one of my first accounts actually was for a grassroots organization in Lafayette, Louisiana, where I went to school. And through learning from hands-on experience with that organization, we were able to make a big difference in our community. And from there, it just sparked this interest and this desire to continue doing that. So I've helped other organizations with their social media practices before, especially those in the nonprofit space or those involved in social change. And then I've also started those practices on my own pages as well. And so it's really one of those things I love talking about is how we can use social media to make a difference in the world, because it can seem like such a tough tool, such a divisive tool. But at the end of the day, social media is a great thing that we have. I'd say it's one of the greatest inventions of the last several decades, all with a singular purpose. And we really get to see how that plays out. But social media was created with this beautiful purpose to connect people together, and to connect people in such a way that it's nearly instantaneous, right? We're able to connect with people all around the world. And some people do that for good, some people do that for bad. And today we're going to talk about how we can really do that to make the best change possible. So I get this habit from my dad, but I always believe that words should be defined and terms should be explained before we use them as frequently as we will. So when we talk about being an advocate, I wanted to start there, because we're also going to talk about action. This is advocacy and action, but that already leads to a question of what is an advocate? So an advocate is someone who amplifies problems occurring in a context or in their neighborhood or in society. And what we mean by amplify is they don't make them bigger, but they bring more noise and bring more focus onto what the problem is. And that's really important. If we were to have a house on fire, your advocate is the one that calls the other people around and brings them to help put the fire out. And this is a little different than being an ally or being an activist, even though it's very easy to be all three. And there's a lot of overlap between them. And an advocate pretty much puts a magnifying glass to the situation, and they call people over. And that's really important. And this is why social media is such a great tool here, is because that's what social media is about. If we're connecting with people for a specific cause is the easiest next step. And so, Martin Luther King kind of has a quote that dives into a key foundational aspect of what advocacy is. And with today being MLK Day, how can we not have a Martin Luther King quote? So he says, "Rarely do we find men who willingly engage in hard, solid thinking. There is an almost universal quest for easy answers and half-baked solutions. Nothing pains some people more than having to think." To be an advocate is to put yourself in a position where you have to think. You have to think about the situation. You have to think about what needs to be done. And even if you're helping mobilize people to it, which is another thing that advocates do, it all comes down to a lot of research and a lot of thinking. And that doesn't have to mean a lot of time, but it's just some effort that goes into it. And it's hard to find people at any time, and then we could say even especially now, where thinking is the priority. And thinking is foundational to gathering people together and to sharing information. So social media and advocacy can really go hand in hand, because it's the perfect platform to bring issues to light, because everybody's already engaging in these spaces. This is, families announce weddings, births, everything, pregnancies, everything on social media. So bringing light to an issue, while it can seem daunting, the best place to do it is to get started with a Facebook account or Twitter account or whatever. So I say there are 5 really cool ways that we can talk about being a social media advocate. And we haven't even dived into the action side, but you'll recognize that that transition is going to be really easy. So the first way is to inform. So this is probably the biggest and hardest step for anybody entering into a space of advocacy. And when I say like entering into it, I don't mean that you now call yourself an advocate and that's just who you are. But when we start making these steps, when we start sharing this information, when we start calling people to certain issues, we are entering into the practices of advocacy. And so informing people on what's happening is vital because people can't do anything unless they know what's going on. But this is also where a lot of advocates can get hung up. Our research and our sharing of information is vital. If we share the wrong link to, say, an article, say if you, let's go back to our house example. If the house is on fire and you're the advocate calling people together to put the fire out and you give the wrong address, that can make a big difference. And we know that, right? Because you have to know the address. And so you make sure before you start bringing people over. The same thing applies on social media. And this is more widespread on the internet, just in general, than we see in almost any other aspect of our lives of trying to figure out what's true and what's not true. And as an advocate, one of our biggest things that we want to do is build credibility over time. As we continue to share information with people, we want to make sure that information is right. Because why would you listen to someone who continues to share wrong information? So when we hear about a cause, it's best for us to do research. Even if that means we just do a quick Google search, we try to see if it's real or not. If there's something happening in our community, maybe we want to ask the question why, even before we share the information. There were a lot of issues and things that I got to deal with while I was living in Lafayette, Louisiana. I now live in Union City, California, but a lot of those issues, while they seemed very easy on the surface, the minute I did a Google search and found a lot more about it, it was oddly complicated. And those issues, once I found out how complicated they were, sometimes what I thought the initial solution was ended up being something that would have been detrimental to the cause. And that's one of the most important things that happens, right? So when we do our research, then we can look into the issue, we can look into what's happening, and we can make an accurate assessment of what's going on. A lot of times we talk about, there's the phrase mainstream media and how they don't necessarily hit accuracy on the head. And that's because they're on a time crunch, right? If you're on the news and you're speaking directly to people live, as information comes in, you're spewing it out and you're trying to share that information. And sometimes that information is not correct. And we're seeing that a lot. But you don't have that same pressure, right? Because it's social media, because you're you. No one's demanding that you share something as soon as possible. And that the minute something happens, the minute it sounds like something has happened, that you find out about it. You have the time to double check, to triple check, to make sure things are right, to figure out your wording before you share any information. I always say it's better to be late than to be incorrect when you inform somebody of what's happening. Because even if you're late, you may bring more information to the topic. One of the biggest topics I've talked about is something called the Lost Cause movement. Post-Civil War, a lot of Confederate families started working in this odd propaganda movement to rewrite the history of the reasons behind the Civil War, the depiction of the Confederacy. And it's a really interesting topic. But when I first got started with that, I didn't necessarily understand how in the world this whole thing happened. And so the first couple of pieces I shared were very shallow. It didn't really make much sense to most people. But then it came out that there were these small organizations that were making big pushes in education policy to change how people taught about issues, especially U.S. history and states' perspectives on the Civil War. And the minute I got to that information, it was mind-blowing. And I was able to share that, and people were able to go and look at their textbooks and say, oh, yeah, I've seen this information. It was a really interesting way that it all played out. But if I had not done the research, then I would have had no idea about any of that other stuff. So the best thing to do, and I mean, of course, I was late. The Civil War happened a very long time ago, and the lost cause movement started ages ago. But sharing that information still can spark and bring change, and it did. So the first thing we do is we inform. We do our research. I always recommend having a couple of sources that you can trust. Um, Ask the right questions, right? Don't take it for granted. Whatever's happening, it's okay if there's an issue that's happening in your neighborhood. If you ask why, I think a lot of times we just accept them as issues, but we may not ask why did this happen? How did this happen? When did this start? What caused it? And sometimes those answers aren't going to be easy to swallow, but they're very important to ask, because as you are sharing information in a space where information is questioned, where the validity of information is questioned, it's better to just be honest about your cause, about what's happening, about even missteps that may have happened along the way, or things that were not helpful that you thought would be helpful. It's good to be honest about that stuff. And the way you can be honest is by taking the time to ask those questions, to get those answers, and then to share that information accurately and accordingly. So that's the first way to be an advocate on social media, is simply to share accurate information in a way that's easy to understand and to comprehend. The second thing to do is to bring others into the fold, to assemble them. Now, social media has made this one of their biggest issues, or one of their biggest focuses really over the last year or so. Is you may have recognized on Facebook that groups have become more popular. Other apps are adding groups as well, and like, this is a really cool thing because it's making the vastness of social media a lot more local, right? You can join a group about one specific thing. You can bring people together for an event, right? I've hosted Thanksgiving before, and one of the ways I've done it is by putting a Facebook event out and inviting specific friends to it. And suddenly we're all able to talk about who was bringing what. The same thing happens on social causes, right? The idea that you are not out there alone, neither should you act like you are out there alone. If you have time to bring people together to make a difference, then we can and we should. All right. So Facebook, has groups, but it also encourages the sharing of opinion. And so understanding that other people have opinions as you are sharing information, as you are engaging with your community, and even if you encourage them to have opinions, that brings people together over a cause. If you stay as alone and you're essentially the person at the end of the street yelling out that you need help, but you refuse to have anybody else around you or anything like that, then you're not really helping the cause. You've just alienated yourself from the situation. And so as an advocate, it's always our idea is to mobilize others to the cause. And whatever that cause may be, there's rarely an issue you're going to have in your community that you can solve entirely as just one person. And so with social media advocacy, one of our big things that we want to do is not just say, hey, have you heard this information? But it's, have you heard this information, and do you care about it like I do? Or do you see something wrong here? Or even, do you see something good here? All right. So we want to bring others into the fold. We want to make sure that people feel that they can share their emotions and opinions with us. And when we talk about social media, this is one of the biggest downfalls. A lot of times we want to present information. We want to be the voice of reason in a situation. And the minute somebody has something that goes against that and they comment on our post, the way we handle it can make a big difference, right? So if someone comments something that disagrees with my position in a space of social engagement, and I decide to hammer down on them instantly, and say, you're dumb, you should not, you shouldn't say those things, or however I want to phrase it. What I've done, even though I may have shut that person down and I may have stopped their small spread of disinformation that was happening on my page, I've also disencouraged people. I've stopped people from feeling encouraged to assemble together with me on an issue. So there is a way that we have to do all of these things. And I know that a lot of us, if we post something that deals with social engagement in any form, or social issues in any form, there's always somebody who gets on your post and they say something and you're like, why would you say that? Why would you do that? But the way we handle those situations is just as important as just asking for people's opinion. Every now and then, um, one of the most beneficial things I've seen in a space of advocacy is honestly just asking on social media. And that helps to bring people together, right? So if there's an issue with the education system in your community, even asking the question, hey, has anybody else noticed, ABC or whatever it is, and giving people the opportunity to say, yes, I have, or no, I haven't, and what they feel about it. What that does is that encourages people to be invested in an issue. And as an advocate, as we're trying to mobilize people, the biggest tool we have is the opportunity to show people they can invest in an issue. That's really important. So assembling people together, right, is using social media as it is to bring people together by the sharing of opinions, by encouraging the sharing of opinions, and by disagreeing with people in a proper manner. So I kind of glazed over the disagreeing one, right? Like we could feel that when someone disagrees with us on social media, take off the earrings, grab the gloves, we're about to go to town, because there's a digital wall between us and that other person. And so we can really easily decide that we're just going to duke it out. We really won't see that many consequences. If it gets that bad, we can block them. As an advocate, people are watching your interactions with people, especially on social media. And so when someone disagrees with you, which happens to me fairly often, when someone disagrees with me, the best thing I can do is, one, stay calm, to keep my emotions out of it, which is very difficult to do, because I'm an advocate for issues that I care about, and they're speaking about something that I care about in a non-friendly way. And if I become upset about it, it's really easy to get caught up in that moment. But to keep my emotions out of my response and to stick with the facts. Right? Someone comes out and they say, "Oh, this crazy thing is happening," and someone else disagrees and they say, "No, you're dumb, you're blind, whatever." And you could say, "Well, I don't think that I'm blind. I think that, these articles show this is what's happening. But, I also respect your opinion at the same time, right? We're not going to agree with everybody. And most opinions are worth respecting. And so if we want to keep people engaging and coming to the fold on an issue, then we have to be the one who leads through a space of grace, to then make this a space for engagement. An advocate, in very simple ways to put it, as I'm talking about this, is someone who lays out a table for people to gather around. And when you are responsible for laying out that table, that also means that you are responsible for everyone who comes to the table and how everybody gets along at the table. And that can be difficult because you can find yourself in a tough space of moderation. And there are plenty of times where I've had someone who we agree on an issue and they say something that is wildly disrespectful to someone who's already disagreeing. And I have to come in, even on social media, and say, hey, like, no, we don't talk to people that way, or we don't have to do these things that way. And that's important because all of that fosters a spirit of community. It also may make it difficult sometimes in a space of advocacy. So an advocate informs people on social media, an advocate assembles people on social media. Another thing an advocate will do is motivate people. Motivation with social issues can be very difficult because when we look at social issues, a lot of the time, they seem larger than life. Today's MLK Day, and it's very easy to feel this sense of overwhelming with the issues of social justice that plague our nation, that have existed since MLK was alive. And that's just one issue that plagues our nation, and there are issues that affect your communities that you may feel the exact same way about. And as an advocate, we we deal with a lot of facts, but outside of those facts, we also deal with hope and encouragement. And that's where motivation kind of comes together. When we deal with big issues, it's very, very easy to look at so many facts that you get bogged down and you get discouraged. I've looked at issues myself, and diving into how school funds are moved around, or where budgetary cuts are made, can feel extremely disheartening. And so as an advocate, one of the things that I encourage people to do, and I encourage you to do, is to look for tangible solutions, even if it's not the biggest solution. Being an advocate doesn't mean that you make the biggest splash in the pond. It means that you're helping to make a ripple. And so if there is an issue happening in your neighborhood, identify that issue, isolate that issue, and figure out where you can start to make a difference. And as you're assembling people together, assemble them on the idea that they can make a difference. A lot of times, especially on social media, you will see people like me who will share information, and it may seem that we share information about issues that are way, way, way too big to handle, right? And when we do something like that, it can feel very, very overwhelming, because you get the information, and say I did a good job of informing you or assembling you or bringing you into the fold or getting your opinions on this. Now you're invested, but now you have all this emotional tension and this burdensome feeling, and there's nothing you can do. And that is a really tough place to be. And that's where a lot of people end up falling into on social media, where you have a really passionate opinion about something, but you also have no idea how in the world you can make that difference. In those situations, as an advocate, one of the things that I always recommend is starting somewhere small, right? If the issue is, something dealing with city council, maybe just go to the city council meeting, and if they have an open floor moment, maybe just asking a question, right? Or reaching out or tagging somebody who can on social media provide more insight, or working with someone who's been in the trenches, who is what we will call an activist, and reaching out to them and finding out a way that you can make a tangible difference. And I'm not saying sizable, I'm saying tangible, something that you can feel, something that you can do, because another thing that an advocate does is they encourage. As we're dancing this line between fact and hope, we have to celebrate. Anytime you're dealing with social issues, it's very easy to become disheartened. I say this from experience of looking at a lot of issues in my community and around the nation, and not really being sure what to do next. And also feeling like I was swinging my fists just through the air. And so it is very important that we encourage each other in the work that we're doing and the impacts that we make, because it's a long work. It's a lot of work. It's a long road ahead of us when we're talking about social change. And just because it's on social media and there's this weird thing of seeing instant notifications of likes and reacts, it can also feel like whatever you do, it doesn't feel like it's enough. And so you have to be encouraged, and you have to encourage one another. And even if that means that you're just sharing a post of volunteers at your local Red Cross making a difference, whatever it is, you find a way to celebrate the good, because as you're bringing people into the fold and as you're getting their opinions on it, you want to let them know that it's okay to have hope in these situations, and that they can make a difference too. That's a long way to put it, but an advocate, as they're setting the table, they are setting the mood for the situation, right? If these are the people who are sharing the information, who are talking about the issue at hand, if you talk in a manner that doesn't breathe hope, then you will start to feel hopeless. And if you talk in a manner on social media, or if you don't encourage, you just simply don't do it, people will eventually get tired of feeling assembled and being motivated, because they don't see any fruit coming from it. So use your social media to share what's happening, to even document what's happening. If you and some friends decide that littering is a big issue in your community, and so you create a Facebook event to have a clean up the park day, a simple way to encourage is just to take a couple of photos and tag those who came and share it on social media. Because at least you may not have been able to save littering throughout the whole city, but you did make a difference in that park. And as an advocate, that's an important step. So outside of the encouragement, what else do we do as advocates? We've looked at informing, We looked at assembling. We've talked about motivating. And now we're going to talk about, and we talked about encouraging, sorry. And now we're going to talk about criticizing. Being an advocate does not mean that we wholeheartedly accept anything that's thrown our way. And that can sound really tough. There are social media advocates out there who, they share things all the time. And maybe they have bad practices, or maybe you don't agree with their methodology. It's okay to say that. It's okay to do that. Also, sometimes when the step forward actually wasn't a good step, it's okay to say that too. Criticizing a social issue brings objectivity. And as an advocate, you want to be aware of people's emotions. You don't want to run over people's emotions, but you also want to be really well grounded in what's actually happening. And so if something happens that's just not good, it's okay to say that. And it's okay to point that out, because what you're doing at the same time is you're sharing all this information, you're pointing out nuances about an issue. You're also building credibility, which is really important as an advocate, right? That people can trust the things that you say. And one of the ways that they know they can trust it is when you're not so caught up in an issue that you can't criticize, or you can't look at it wholeheartedly or objectively. You have to look at the whole thing. And when things have gone wrong, or when things are not going well, having the courage to say that on social media can be quite difficult, but it's very important. I've been a part of organizations where we've made a misstep, or I have directly made a misstep, especially working in marketing and communications. It can happen quite easily. And being able to say that that was not necessarily the best move to take, even for myself, makes a big difference. And what it does to people is it reminds them that you are human too. On social media, it's very easy, and you'll see this a lot, where people have created these personas or these personalities that feel larger than life. And there's a distance that puts between us. As an advocate, when we're talking about social issues, we don't want to position or present ourselves in such a way that we are now distant from our community, or we are distant from our followers on social media. And that's because we want to be working with them. We want to be making a difference. We're not pulling a, it's not like Beyonce and her fans, right? There's a distance there, and there has to be. For us, we're right there in the work with them. And so we need to speak in a way that shows honesty and shows humanity, and still shows hope. So, the first thing we do as an advocate is we're informing people on social media. We're sharing links, but we're also doing research. We're pointing out problems, but we're not rushing to do it. We want to make sure that we got it right before we share it. The other thing we do through social media is that we assemble. We talked about Facebook groups, events, but really the idea of bringing people to the fold. And we'll dive really deep on some of the technical stuff in just a second. And then on social media, we can find ways to motivate people with tangible solutions, with tangible events. And we can encourage them for the good that they do. And we can criticize when things don't necessarily go well. So let's talk about the technicalities. How in the world do we actually do this on social media platforms? When a link is shared, right? If you share a link on Facebook, on Twitter, or on LinkedIn, what you're doing is you're giving an endorsement to it. And that just speaks to almost anything. So if you share a link that speaks on any issue whatsoever, even subconsciously, what you're saying to your followers or those who will engage with your post is that you wholeheartedly, unless you specify otherwise, agree with what is ever in the link that you just shared. And that is actually really terrifying. Say it's an op-ed piece from the New York Times about some issue, and you share it because it had a really good statistics, but it's an op-ed piece, it's an editorial, it's an opinionated editorial. And so you shared it on your page and you say, oh, this is really interesting. And you mean that, it is really interesting. but your followers are going to think that, like, if this person has said anything crass in this article or has said something that's even just comes out a little strange, that those are your views as well. That's tough, right? And so when we're looking at our sources or when we share a link, that doesn't mean we have to panic or freak out. Being an advocate is actually very easy, and you're going to see that very soon, because if you copy a link from, I'll just stick with the New York Times, and you share it on Facebook and you're bringing light to an issue, you've already taken steps into advocacy, and that's great. But you also want to read that issue first, and you want to make sure that you don't have any issues with it, that you don't have any problems with it. What if you do have problems with it? You can still share the piece, and you can simply post and say, hey, I really like blah, 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 blah in this article. I'm sorry, I'm acting like I'm holding a phone. I really like, blah, blah, blah in this article, but I really don't agree with this piece. And then you post it. Now you've given a clear objective, and you've done a little bit of criticizing because you said you don't agree with something, but you've done it in such a way that if someone reads it, they understand your position on it. Right? One of the things I always recommend, if you are social media and you're trying to advocate and you're using news or you're using journalism, any form, make sure that those forums are trusted. Today, anybody can create a page and become a journalist. And you will see a lot of, I will call them out-of-pocket answers or theories on stuff, sometimes come from non-trusted websites. And when we say trusted websites, yeah, it's usually the brands that are like the biggest brands in it. NPR, New York Times, Washington Post, San Francisco Chronicle are all great resources. But if you hear about, JimJonesNews.com, it's probably not going to be as trustworthy as the other three, just by name alone. It could be an extremely accurate resource, but if you share it and someone clicks on it and it just doesn't look right, they're already going to have some bias to the article. Another way that we can use social media specifically is by asking questions. I mentioned this earlier. So if you're on Facebook and you are looking for food that night, they have a feature where you can ask recommendations. That's a really cool idea, that you can ask your friends and your neighbors throughout your city where you should eat that night, and they can post the page and it brings up a little map and it shows you exactly where it's located. I think that's fantastic. The same kind of idea can apply to any issue that's happening in your community. Bring up a fact, just a simple fact, and say, what do you think about this? Anytime that I'm looking at a new social issue, I do that. And it's very entertaining, and a really, it brings good perspective to a situation. Because if you're trying to advocate for an issue, let's say it's education, you need to know how people feel about education. If you go back to our original example about the house being on fire, if you are trying to let people know about the house being on fire, and you're telling people who already know that the house is on fire and are grabbing buckets and water and all these other things, then you're wasting your breath. You should help grab a bucket and grab water and help them along the way. So take an issue, take something that's happening in your community, something that's really simple that you can expound upon, and that you've done enough research to talk about it just a little bit, right? So you can be in a space where you can provide introductory information and simply ask, how do you feel about this? And then what I usually do, if I have the time, is as people are answering on that post, I'm going to go and reply to their opinions. And I'm not going to say anything crazy, right? It's going to be like, oh, I never thought about it that way, or I really appreciate that. And for those I disagree with, I usually use I never thought about it that way, or that's really interesting. But what I'm doing is I'm just listening. I'm listening to what's happening, and I've built a place for conversation just like that on my Facebook page. I can do this on Twitter too. If I tweet something, one of my favorite things now in being in California is just tweeting about what's happening in the community, or saying like, hey, what cultural things are happening out here, or what are some strange California things, and just watching the answers come in. It's always entertaining to see how people look at this world. But even more than it being entertaining, is extremely informative. So asking that question anytime you're getting into a situation is a great way to use social media to your advantage. Another thing that you can do is you can add people on social media that you may not necessarily agree with. Now, I say this very carefully. If you find yourself as a person to be easily affected, we can use the word triggered, by what people post on social media, don't do this step. But if you can use social media as a way to listen to what's happening in your community, and it won't get under your skin and bother you deeply, to see a variety of those opinions, especially those that will disagree with you, then I highly recommend doing this. And the way I did it in Lafayette was this. I had a rule. So first, I added my friends, those who were, excuse me, I would add my friends, those I was already connected with, or those who I knew. But then I recognized that as I added more friends, that my mutual friend list was growing quite high, and these are people that I may not know, but I would add them. I had a rule that if me and another person had over 100 mutual friends in common, there was a very good chance that I had met them. And if I had met them, then I could at least probably connect with them in social media, or if we at least seen each other, then I wasn't a stranger appearing on their social media. And you would believe that usually works. Now I have a lot of Facebook friends. I need to adjust my numbers. But saying that I have 150 mutual friends with someone and I've never met them before, and I just quickly add them on Facebook and see what happens. What that does is it grows my social network. And by growing my social network, I'm able to connect with more and more people, which means when I share information about a cause happening in our neighborhood, more people see it and it can have a bigger impact. Again, if you get heavily bothered by what some people put on social media, if you find that it creates emotional tension for you at a high level, I don't recommend doing this. But if it doesn't, right, and you find that you can wade those waters fairly well, then I definitely recommend doing this. It turns your social media into just a way to connect with friends, because you're still able to do that, but into a listening booth, and also a podium to which you can speak from. Outside of those two things, I recommend having some go-to people. These are people who, when you talk about an issue, they'll respond and that they will bring insight. And I think that's really important. Finding a way to bring insight to a conversation. You don't have to be the expert to be an advocate. And a lot of times we feel like we will. Especially on social media, if you don't have the right answer, then you shouldn't talk about it. It's usually the pressure that people feel. But as an advocate, it's okay to say I don't know. And in saying that, what I will say is it's a great space to be able to tag somebody in a post and bring their insight and their engagement. What that does is it shows that you're not standing alone, and it brings a lot of that pressure and it takes it away from you directly. Right? If you have a friend who knows a little bit more about city busing issues than you do, and you want to talk about it, and you're able to tag them, and that they're going to respond back, now you're again creating a space for conversation. Let's talk about some things that we shouldn't do. I know we're down to, Kaylin, what does I have? 20 minutes left?
You just go. If people need to hop off, they will.
Oh, okay. Always try to be courteous of the time. So let's talk about some things that we shouldn't do with social media advocacy. And we're still going to talk a little bit about action as well. One of the things that we should never do is polarize or dehumanize. Polarizing is to hit with an extreme from the other side. If there's an issue at hand, hitting on imagine a pendulum. This is the best way to explain this. It's swinging back and forth. Your issue's in the middle. A polarizing opinion is one way or the other. Usually when you have a polarizing opinion, that opinion isn't going to be extremely helpful or accurate. It's usually one or the other. It may seem helpful, but it's not accurate, or it may seem accurate, but it's just not helpful. So when we have a situation and we're posting on social media, using polarizing ideas is a good way to make your post what I would call incendiary. You're not building bridges at that point, you're burning them. And even when you have a strong opinion on something, there are ways that you can write it, and there are practices that you can take to make sure that it's not a polarizing opinion, or you don't say it in a polarizing manner. And you may say, well, how do you do that? You don't post when you're angry is the first step. I think when we talk about social issues, it's very easy to get angry or sad. And when we have those emotions, one of the first things that gets affected is our language and the language that we use. And if you find yourself talking about an issue and you can feel your blood start to boil, or that your chest tighten as you are filled with passion about that issue, you need to be more aware of what you're about to say. And in doing that, you may have to take a second. There are times where issues have happened, and I just had to take a moment before I could post about it. It was such a concerning issue. It was a huge issue for me, but I was also so emotional in the moment that I knew if anybody commented, it wasn't going to be what I just said, but if anybody commented, I was going to say something polarizing and that was not helpful. And so I had to take a break and I had to step away. I was able to come back in like a few hours and post it anyway and be fine. And now I calmed down and I could really think it through. But when things are heavy and things are emotional, even if you share something, right, you see something that's really heavy and really emotional. Now we're seeing issues of police brutality being brought directly to the forefront of social media through live video. And you see something like that and you share it, and you know that like that's so heavy of an issue that you can't speak on that right now. Then even watch if you commenting. That you're not commenting in such a way that burns bridges instead of building them. Another thing we don't want to do is we don't want to antagonize those around us. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the polarizing. If someone has a bad idea or an idea that you don't agree with, or a value or a position that you don't agree with, assuming that it's still within what we call moral confines, so like there's not saying something terribly inhumane, then don't fly too far away, right? Because as an advocate, a lot of people are gonna throw mud your way. And that's true, and they're gonna do it on your social media pages. But the more respectful you can come across, and the more calm that you can come across, the better it is. And you can still let them know, say it is an inhumane opinion or a despicable idea. You can still have that opinion. I'm not saying not to, and I'm not saying don't say that on social media, but the way that you say it, if you fly off the handle and you curse them out, even that people may enjoy seeing that and they may appreciate it because that's what they feel. What you're showing is that this is not a total space for conversation. And I'm saying this very, very carefully. People will have terrible opinions about things. When we talk about racism, the words that people can use can be extremely heavy, and they should not be tolerated. And the way that you communicate that they should not be tolerated is up to you. But we can, as people, communicate that in such a way that it discourages others who may or may not have those opinions from speaking up. And as an advocate, right, we're setting a table, we're creating a space of discord and of conversation, and the mood of that table falls to us. I've had people say absolutely terrible things, and I'm the first one on social media or even in person to address it the same way of, hey, like, you're not going to talk like that here. Like, I understand that you're upset or that you have some opinions on it, but this is not the place for that conversation. However you want to phrase that. It's better than flying off the handle and giving them exactly what they want, which is for you to appear irate, to appear angry, and to come across as a way to show they can get under your skin. The more that you're an advocate for a situation, the more that people will really want to make you flustered. Because, as I said, that credibility is so important. On social media in general, that credibility is so important. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we always speak in a way that is graceful, that shows peace to people, And if you're concerned over if someone's going to say something wrong, or if they're going to get people to agree with them by saying something inhumane or disrespectful or just genuinely terrible, you don't have to worry about that. Things have a nice way of working out to where you don't have to worry when someone says something mean or distasteful on your page. People have a way of dealing with that. And again, you want to foster this spirit of community. Excuse me. You want to foster a spirit of community, but you want to do so in a way that makes it clear that this is a space for respect and care without damaging your credibility in the same process. But you also want to make it clear what you stand for and what you don't. Excuse me, I'm trying to get this thing out of my throat. And so if you don't agree with something, I'm not anyone who would say, just, bide your tongue. Don't say you don't agree with that. You can very well say you don't agree with something without it being entirely inflammatory or disrespectful or incendiary. And that's okay. So the biggest thing with social media, it's not about the timing that you post or your tweeting or any of those things, but when it comes to advocacy, it comes to how you share information, and it comes to doing it in a respectful manner. The things you have to avoid doing are sharing false information and being disrespectful. It's amazing that we get to live in an age where we can build a computer or we can build a table on the internet and have people gather around and we can make change. So to quickly talk about action, because advocacy takes up a lot of this, and I understand that. And you may be curious about how do you use social media to inspire action. You do a lot of the same things. But the big thing here is that you stay practical. All right. So if you are to talk about an issue, you want to motivate people, you've informed them, you've assembled your group of people, they're all motivated, they're ready to go, then the action side is to say what you're going to do, where you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, and to be as detailed as possible. I'm a logistics person by heart, so this part never comes hard for me, but it may for some people. If you say, hey, let's do a park cleanup day, the action side is to go ahead and either you can create it as an official event, or you can just simply say, hey, we're doing this at this date on this time here. You are seeing information now in the news about those who entered the Capitol using social media to plan out that attack and that event. And there are mixed feelings about that. But the essential piece here is that the same way that social media has been used to affect our democracy and affect our nation throughout the years can be used in a positive manner. And it's not something inherently evil about getting people together and working together through social media. And it's really easy to feel that way, especially in the wake of an attack just a few weeks ago. But here, in a space for action, we can learn a lot about what not to do in that event. In your community, when something happens, you can quickly create an event. But again, it's better to be late than it is to be incorrect. When something like this happens and you're ready to make an actionable impact on your community, think it through. Think it through well enough to where you don't have to change your plans on social media. But also watch the language that you're using when you're inspiring people to take action. We've seen what we could call dog whistle language used on social media for years. And that makes a big difference. And so what dog whistle language is encouraging people into a certain mentality without actually saying that we're encouraging them into that mentality. And so when we talk about social media, it's very easy not to do this. We simply have to say what we want to do. We don't have to make it very dramatic, but the minute we do, we usually end up in this kind of dog whistle space. So what you want to do is, if you are trying to inspire action, you have a plan, lay it out and make it simple. Don't talk about all of the grand dreams that it will accomplish. If you're here to clean the park and you want to inspire action on social media, say, hey, we're gathering at the park at this point. Bring gloves, bring trash bags. We're going to be picking up trash. Come join us. It's going to be great. And leave it at that. Don't make it into this big thing. And then celebrate it what it is, as what it is. This is very different than what happened with the Capitol attack. And I know that in this time, it's impossible to be on social media and not think about what's happening in our nation. But one of the biggest things that has been proven with this incident is when we don't keep things simple, things are interpreted every which way. And I can leave that statement at that. So when it comes to your own events, as factual as you can be and as objective as you can be, and then let the event speak for itself. There is nothing wildly attractive about going to a park and picking up trash. But it's always amazing to see the photos of people doing that and people gathering together and people smiling. And so when you have those events, you don't have to make it into a very glamorous, fancy thing. It's make it what it is and then just document it as such. Because those photos will live forever. Sharing it is a very important moment. And if you want to inspire action, one of the things you have to do is you need to share what happens. You need to share the greatness of what's going on in your community. If you painted mailboxes, if you planted flowers, sharing that stuff shows your activity in the community, which is important for credibility. But it also shows people how simple it is to make the difference that they've talked about making for such a long time. So advocacy takes care of a lot of the steps that lead to action. But if you look at social media as a place, as a platform that you can build trust and credibility, you can inspire change in your community by informing them, by assembling them together, by motivating them to make change, by showing that they can, in fact, make a difference in their community, and encouraging them when that difference has been made, and even criticizing when things don't go necessarily right. I want you to be as objective as you can on social media when it comes to sharing issues, but speak gracefully to people and be as helpful as possible. If someone has a question, it's okay to say you don't know. It's also great to tag other people into the conversation or share other resources. Social media is become the Wild West, and these really simple practices, and I hope this information is as helpful as it can be. But these simple practices can make a big difference in the impact that you have on your community using probably one of the most controversial tools in 2021. That's all I really have. I have a little bit more, but I'd really like to open the floor for questions.
I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you so much. This has been so informative and helpful for us. And I just was kind of hanging on every word you talked about and how we can be better to support this community. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello. I'd like to say that even while you were talking, a situation popped up on my Facebook. I had asked someone a question yesterday, and I guess they took till today to figure out a way to answer me and make it cut. And so I wanted to type back, and I didn't. I sent them, a smiley face, and I'm going to cool off and not lose a friend. Thank
That's
you.
always a good practice. A lot of times we get really quick to block people or lose that friend, but if you're using our social media to make this kind of difference, it's definitely important to take that time. So I'm glad you are. Are there any people using social media for an organization or using it personally or trying to enter into that space? You may have any general social media questions. This is also my profession. So if you have any questions on what's happening with social media or all of those things, feel free to shoot those as well.
Hi, this is Lana here. Many of us who are in the Red Cross share social media posts from the Red Cross, and we have several volunteer groups as well as our individual region groups, and many of us are active in sharing things. And some of the things you say about the anger issue, we've had several situations when we have large-scale disasters that might have had a mistake, it gets blown out of proportion, or the truth isn't told. And it does make a lot of us feel very upset more than angry. And so I think we've done a much better job this year of trying to respond back to some of that. In the past, we didn't communicate at all, but we do have some communicators now who try to step by step go over facts and correct this. But any suggestions? I mean, some of these instances are from years ago and it keeps being brought up year after year. Any suggestions on different ways to maybe possibly handle those items?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So when, oh my goodness, my roommate's awake. He just sneezed very loudly. Back to what I was saying. Yes. So if you are talking about issues that have happened in the past that one way or another, either the information makes it appear mishandled or it was mishandled, and people keep bringing it up, that's a really tough space. The best thing to do, and this is more from a public relations standpoint, is to get ahead of it. If you know this is something that's going to come up, and it's better not to delete it or try to hide it, but to simply say, like, yes, we understand this happened, and you have a very clear statement or stance on what it is, and go from there. The worst thing that you can do is not respond to it at all. And that's tough, because when people berate us about our mistakes, even as human beings, our first instinct is to defend ourselves, and our defense mechanisms are all different. But for some of us, we just tend to ignore these things and hope they will eventually go away. And in this case, that doesn't always work, because people will just continue to berate with their opinions and their opinions. But if you have a very clear stance on how something has happened, continue to refer to that stance. You can't stop people from bringing things up, but by doing it in that way, you stay consistent, and they will eventually trust your stance on that issue. Whether they agree with it or not is completely up to them, and you can't make them agree with you. But staying consistent in your positioning will make a big difference. There. It's great to know that you have people, what we call doing the social listening or commenting and making sure that things are accurate. That's very important. Social media, well, Facebook specifically, has introduced a lot of tools. You now see fact checkers pop up on certain articles if they're getting shared a lot. Twitter encourages you to read an article before you retweet it. So if you're staying in that space, there are some tools on social media, but the best thing is honestly going to be doing your research before you post.
Thanks.